How do you get a witness to actually admit something that might be detrimental to them during the course of questioning in a pretrial deposition? You want to know the answer? Come join me for a walk along the beach as I share with you the answer to that question. Hi, I'm Gerry Oginski, a New York medical malpractice and personal injury attorney. So let's say this is a car accident matter. And now I want to be able to confront this witness, the driver who caused this accident, and say, hey, why did you go through the red light? Now, I know that they're going to say they did not go through a red light. So simply confronting them and asking them a simple, straightforward question such as, didn't you go through the red light? Their answer is automatically going to be, of course I didn't. The light was green when I went through it. So now, how can I ask questions during this pretrial question and answer session that lawyers call a deposition, also an examination before trial, that will help me pick apart their testimony and hopefully get them to actually admit what they did was incorrect? Let me share with you a couple of different strategies. One of the strategies is getting the witness to admit and to accept that there are different rules of the road. Mr. Jones, would you agree that when driving down a street, it's important to follow all traffic laws? Oh, yes, of course. And you would agree that when you see a stop sign, the law requires that you come to a stop. Isn't that true? Yes. Likewise, if you're coming to an intersection and you see that there is a traffic light, you have to abide by the colors of that traffic light. Isn't that true? Yes. And you know that those are the rules of the road. Isn't that true? Yes. And you know that green means go, continue forward, right? You also know that yellow means caution or slow down, right? He's got to say yes. And you know that red means stop. Isn't that true? Yes. Okay, so what am I doing? I'm getting him to accept and to understand that there are rules of the road and that he's required to follow them, and that as a licensed driver in the state of New York, he is required to know those basic rules. So why is that important? Because it establishes a baseline. It establishes the fact that there are rules that have to be followed. If I were to come right out and say, didn't you go through that red light, Mr. Jones? His answer is going to be, of course not. Why? Because people get defensive when you confront them straight on. They get offended, and now they become defensive, and they turn around and say, absolutely not. Now, where do you go from that once he denies that he went through the red light? You as the questioner, me as the questioner, are kind of stuck at that point because now he refuses to acknowledge and admit that he did anything wrong. And now there's very little wiggle room for me to ask additional questions to try and force him to go ahead and admit he might have done something wrong. So again, I could ask him repeatedly, you realize that going through a red light would be wrong, isn't that true? Yes. You realize that going through a red light could be dangerous? Yes. You realize that going through a red light would violate the vehicle and traffic law, isn't that true? Yes. But that doesn't accomplish what I'm looking for. So what do I do instead? What I can do, one strategy is to ask him a series of very simple, inane, innocuous questions. Mr. Jones, before getting into your car, you had to use your key to get into the car, or your key fob, isn't that true? Yes. You got into the car and you put your seatbelt on, isn't that true? Yes. And you put your seatbelt on because that's the law, isn't that right? Yes. And before turning the ignition on, you checked your mirrors to make sure they were in the proper, correct position, isn't that true? Yes. Your seat was in the correct position, isn't that true? Yes. And now, you wear eyeglasses? I do. And you were wearing your eyeglasses at the time, correct? Yes. Isn't it true that your car came equipped with a push-button ignition start? Yes. And in order to start your ignition, you needed to put your foot on the brake first before your car would start. Isn't that true? Yes. And once you put your ignition on, once you turned your ignition on, then you actually had to put your car into gear. Isn't that right? Yes. So you moved the gear selector from park into drive, assuming you did not have to back out of your spot first. Is that correct? Yes. And once you put your gear into drive, you then put your foot on the accelerator pedal. Isn't that right? Yes. And your car was in good working order. Is that correct? Yes. You had no issues, no mechanical problems with your car and the days leading up to this event? That's correct. And on the day of the event, before this impact occurred, you had no problem with your car, correct? You had no problem with your accelerator, isn't that right? Yes. You had no problem with your brakes, isn't that true? Yes. So what am I doing with these small, simple, little questions? I'm getting him to acknowledge the various steps that he had to take in order to actually get his car moving and to go forward. Now, why is that important? It's not important on the key issue about whether he went through the red light. But it is important getting him to understand that there are a series of steps, conscious steps that he had to take in order to comply with the rules of the road. Now, once he gets out into the roadway, now he has to follow the rules of the road. You're aware that there's parking on both sides of this street? Yes. You're aware that there's a speed limit, isn't that true? Yes. And you would agree it's important to follow that speed limit, isn't that true? Yes. And the reason why you follow that speed limit is because anything above the posted speed limit is inherently dangerous. Would you agree with that? He has to agree. And again, all I'm doing is asking him small, little, innocuous questions. Now, as he's approaching the intersection where the accident took place, Mr. Jones, isn't it true you were listening to your radio? Yes, it is. And your windows were open, isn't that true? Yes. And you had no one in the car with you, isn't that right? True. So now he's by himself, he's got the radio on, his windows are down, and you also have a cell phone, isn't that true? Yes. And your cell phone has the ability to receive and send text messages, correct? Yes. And you can video chat with people through FaceTime or some other means, isn't that true? Yes. And of course, you can also use your phone as a telephone and communicate with someone using that, correct? Yes. And you have CarPlay, isn't that right? Yes. And if someone were to make a call while you were attached to CarPlay, the sound, the audio would then go through the speaker system in your car, isn't that true? Yes. In other words, you don't have to fiddle with the controls on your phone or take your eyes off the road in order to reach for your phone to accept the call. Isn't that true? Yes. Again, what am I doing? I'm getting him to accept and to admit certain little small things, very simple small things, all leading to the fact of what he's doing in the car, of his actions leading up to the intersection, and I'm getting him to acknowledge and to accept the fact that there are rules of the road associated with driving his car from the point that he left where he was parked to the point where the intersection accident occurred. Okay, and now what I'll do is now I will break it down even further. This roadway that you were traveling on, is it one-way or two-way? How many lanes of moving travel were there in the direction in which you were heading? Now, were you heading south, north, east, west? What time of evening was it? What time of day was it? What was the weather like? How long did it take you to go from the point where you parked your car to the point where the intersection accident occurred? Now he's going to tell me. And what was your average speed as you were proceeding along this particular road? And how long did it take you to go from point A to point B where the incident occurred? It is critically important for me to establish and ask questions about speed, time, and distance. If I have 2 out of those 3 items, I can always calculate the third. So many times someone who's driving and involved in an accident is not going to know the specifics of exactly how long it took to go from point A to point B. They may not know the specific speed at which they were traveling or the specific distance that they traveled in order to go from point A to point B. However, I can try and pin them down. And as an attorney asking questions of this particular person who we believe caused this incident, it is critically important to try and pin this witness down. So let's go back to the question I raised at the very beginning. What does this all have to do with getting this witness to potentially agree that this guy, that he went through a red light? As we get closer and closer to the point of the intersection, now what I will do is break down the sequence of events even further. Mr. Jones, as you were approaching this intersection, can you tell me what the color of the light was? Oh, it was green. For how long did you view this intersection, this traffic light, before you got to the intersection? Oh, I saw it for about 10 seconds before. And at that point, how far away were you from the intersection where this accident, where this impact occurred? Oh, I was 200 feet away. And what was the speed? Can you estimate your speed at the time that you first saw this particular green traffic light? Now, as you're approaching the intersection, did that traffic light change color at any time? And you would agree, wouldn't you, sir, that if the light was yellow as you approached the intersection, you had an obligation to slow down. Isn't that true? And if you failed to slow down in light of a yellow traffic light, you would agree that would be a violation from the vehicle and traffic law. Would you agree? And that would be a violation from the rules of the road. Isn't that right? He has to say yes. And can we also agree that if, as you approach the intersection, you observed the light to be red, and you went through that traffic intersection, that would be a clear departure, a clear violation from the rules of the road, a clear violation of the vehicle and traffic law, wouldn't that? And you would agree that that would be improper. And you know that would be improper because going through a red traffic light means that the opposite direction of traffic now has the green light, meaning 90 degrees from you, going left and right of you, They have the green light. And if you enter an intersection on a red light, you have the knowledge and an understanding that there could potentially be cars traveling from your left to your right and from your right to your left. Isn't that true? Yes. And going through an intersection that is known to be red, that would be improper. Would you agree? And again, he has to agree. So I'm not confronting him head on and saying, hey, you went through the red light, isn't that true? No, no, no. I'm getting him to acknowledge what the rules of the road are. I'm getting him to accept the fact that as he approaches the intersection, he has to recognize what the different colors of the light mean. And now, as he gets closer and closer to the intersection, if the light has changed, if it's now yellow, he has an obligation to slow down. And if the light is red, he has an obligation to stop before entering the intersection. And by doing that, by asking these series of small, simple, innocuous questions, now, ultimately, I will get him to accept that if the color of the light was different than what he said, then yes, he would have to do those particular things, slow down or come to a stop. And going through the light or going through the intersection at that point would be improper. Ultimately, I will then confront him after I've asked him this entire series of questions. I will ask him, Mr. Jones, as you approach the intersection, isn't it true the light turned yellow? Oh, no, 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 it didn't. If I told you that there are two witnesses on the corner who said that the light was yellow way before you got to the intersection, would that change your opinion? Would that change your mind? Mr. Jones, as you approached the intersection, did the color of the light change to red before you entered the intersection? Oh, no, no, at no time. If I told you that there were 3 witnesses who observed your car going through a red light for your travel, for your direction, would that change your opinion? Oh, no, no, they're totally wrong. Okay, so now I have contradictions between what I know other witnesses have said and what this guy's actions represent and what he believes to be true. So why do I share this quick information with you? I share it with you just to open your eyes, to help you understand how these types of cases work in the state of New York. You know, I realize you're likely watching this because you have questions or concerns about your own matter. Well, if your matter did happen in New York and you are thinking about bringing a lawsuit, but haven't done so yet because you still have questions that need to be answered, what I invite you to do is pick up the phone and call me. You know, I answer questions like yours every single day, and I'd love to chat with you. You can reach me at 516-487-8207 or by email at Gerry, Gerry, at Oginski-law.com. That's it for today's video. I'm Gerry Oginski. Have a fantastic day.